epitome of unconstrained hate that was unleashed on Israel on the 7th. By the way, again, one other quick thing on that, because it's something that is so often in my mind, is onto communities, by the way, in the south of Israel, precisely overpopulated by people who dreamed the dream of peace with their neighbors and believed, for instance, that, you know, by driving Palestinian children from Gaza to Israeli hospitals every weekend, they were doing something in the cause of peace. Literally, the woman who was doing that, who was in her 70s, was burned alive in her home on October the 7th. So the simple dreaming does not make it so. You may well be living in the most wonderful dream, but if everyone else is not, you better just hope you're not woken up one day. But the likelihood is you will be. And again, what I've laid out about the situation in Britain, I hope, is some example of that. A dream which maybe doesn't work, maybe you're woken up from. Oh my gosh!
Right.
Yes,
Okay,
you can't believe how much that's been on my mind. My late friend Jonathan Sachs wrote, after Strange Death of Europe came out, he wrote to me with a message from with a line from Ezekiel, where he said, what's the line? He said, and whether they listen or fail to listen, they should know that a prophet stood among them.
Right.
Which I have to chilled me when I got in. I really hope that he wasn't right.
Right. Well, so I see. So,
well, we certainly don't need people to be more dreamy and weaker than they currently are.
All right. So maybe we could turn our attention in this direction. You know, in this conversation, we've done a lot of what conservative types often do, which is to point to what's not good and to make a case for its pathology and danger. What is it that you're defending? What is it that's the West, let's say, that whose loss you're decrying? Like what's at the bottom of this that we're in such radical danger of losing? This is exactly what Dawkins was pointing to, however implicitly, when he described himself as a cultural Christian. It's like, okay, the West is under assault. Well, what is it that's worth defending precisely? And how do you conceptualize that and make it explicit? And so
the main thing is that what you've just outlined, we should be continuing. You know, one of the things is where small c conservatism is that if the most radical figures on the left come up with completely bizarre new manifestos for what should happen, like the complete forgetting of biology or anything else, if they come up with that, it's true that others could resist that and say, no, we have an alternative utopian vision and so on. I myself not a devotee of that idea. I'm a devotee of the idea of returning to the sane and the normal and the pursuit of the beautiful and the true. Now, those are all things which you don't have to invent a whole new paradigm for. We had it. We have it in the civilization you just described, in the institutions, in the buildings, in the works of art, and much more. It's what I mean, think of it this way. What if instead of everybody in our age who has any intelligence being told that they should use it to problematize history and go over history, focus on things that were solved and try to unsolve them and make the situation worse? What if instead of that, people actually wanted to make history? What if instead of being figures who could make the past worse and approach it with greater lack of nuance than ever before, they decided to become historic figures themselves? Well, that would be something to aim for. What if instead of seeing the dozen or so figures that stand over the courtyard at Columbia University, Dante, Aristotle, and so on, what if instead of viewing them as simply dead white men, you viewed them as part of a tradition that you can be a part of and add to? Well, that would be something. And I think it's a very good vision for life. And I think it did our forebears well. And if you have a pride in that tradition, which certainly in Europe we have the right to, not to eradicate any dark times, goodness knows, but a right to have that tradition and to want to add to it and to want to preserve it and keep it going. That seems to me a pretty good basis for life. And remembering things that everyone knew until yesterday.
They were just pursuing their own power dynamic for their own narrow, self-serving purposes.
Which is it's so preposterous. I mean, I was with some mutual friends of ours recently on the island of St. Helena, and although I tend to take the British view about Napoleon, which was that he was a proto-tyrant, you cannot sit in Napoleon's study in Longwood House looking out at the ocean and considering the battalions of the British Army that had to stay on the island to keep the emperor inside, and the fleet of British boats that had to sit in the harbour facing inwards to make sure the emperor didn't escape, to just think, wow, this was a world historical force, this man. You're able to take the bad with the good sometimes. And, but goodness me, I mean, the idea that there were no great men in history or that it's all just sort of relative is so preposterous. And you don't have to go to a sort of Carlylean great man theory. But by the way, that's a much better theory of history than anything that's being pushed on us at the moment. I mean, I don't want to ramble, but I mean, there's a case that I was saying, actually, I did an alternative commencement speech for some of the students at Columbia the other month because they weren't allowed a commencement ceremony because of the protesters at their university. And of course, so a nice group of students and their families asked if I would speak, and I did as much as I could. And but one of the things, I said, as well as talking about the famous great figures of the past, I gave the example of there's a 16-year-old who Andrew Roberts mentions in his History of World War II, The Storm of War. The 16-year-old who lied about his age to get into the British Navy as a submariner in 1940 or so, is on one of the submarines that sinks a German U-boat. They get the crew off the boat and it's sinking, but this 16-year-old and a couple of the others get into this German U-boat as it's sinking, find among other things one of the encryption devices, which is sent back to Bletchley Park and which allows the Allies to crack the Enigma code. That 16-year-old ended up being, as it happened, he was chucked out of the Navy because he'd lied about his age. But that 16-year-old boy called Tommy changed the course of human history for the good. Now, tell me it wouldn't be better as a society, instead of telling people to wallow in grievance and anger and bitterness, to say, it actually doesn't matter where you come from. If you have it in you, you could be a world historical figure as well and improve things demonstrably for the better with your life.
And it sounds to me like what you're doing with your new tour is bringing an expanded vision of the hell that awaits us if we don't walk a little bit more carefully than we have been.
And the heroism that can await you too. That's, I will get into this more, but I mean, that is one of the things that I find extraordinary from my past year. I've seen it before, but wow, until you see what people are able to do under unbelievable circumstances and to risk their lives and sometimes to give their lives for a common good, for a purpose, for a cause, sacrificially, almost self-sacrificially. I'm thinking of people who drove right into the fire on the 7th and were citizens and who stood up for their neighbor and saved a lot of people. And people often think heroism is, sort of a thing from the past. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's something that if the time emerges, you would hope you'll be able to raise yourself to. But I've seen many people who did.
Accept it without becoming bitter and murderous. And that's not nothing.
Well, right. I mean, it has to be that there is an answer to demoralization, and that is something like remoralization of people, a reminder of people to rise to their better instincts, to rise to their better pasts, to aspire to their better forebears. That's all possible. There's no reason that radicals on any side should have to drag us down into this pit. Absolutely no reason. And we should be able collectively to cut whatever rope it is that they are trying to link us to and pull us down on, and saying, no, you can go that way, but you're not taking me with you.
Yeah, you're not taking me or anybody I can communicate effectively with
Right.
you. We've got 12,000 students signed up already to Peterson
That's
Academy.
fantastic.
Yeah, well, so
Wow.
that's a good,
There you go.
it's a good index of the hunger that people have for an education that has the goal that you just described, which is to remind people not only of where they could go if they weren't awake, but also of who they could be if they decided to be who they could be.
Absolutely. I was with one of my fellow St. Helenans the other week with Andrew Doyle, who had just done the Shakespeare series for you. And I said, what a fantastic thing to have Andrew Doyle teaching Shakespeare. And I said, I said to him, one of the funny things these days is that if you wanted to get a university grant to study Shakespeare, you'd only be able to get one if you were promising to queer Shakespeare or problematize him or look at him through the colonial lens. If you just wanted to study the tragedies or the comedies, it'd be extremely hard to get a grant. But as a friend of ours pointed out, I like to reiterate, the stupid thing about that is the idea is the idea that it's our job to judge Shakespeare. Whereas maybe Shakespeare is able to judge us. And maybe if you read Shakespeare well and watch it well and listen to it well and think about it well, you'll realize that sometimes Shakespeare judges us and finds us wanting. And, maybe that's just possible, that one of the reasons why we keep on wanting to chuck out great figures from the past is because actually, like anything beautiful, it makes us nervous.
Any ideal is a judge.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, and that's a very interesting thing to contemplate psychologically, because the conundrum there is, well, that means the higher ideal, the more severe the judgment. So that's a problem, and that's a non-trivial problem. Like, I'm not trying to make light of that, but there's a corollary to that, is that.
Yeah. Well, no, and that's why, the great answer, as I said at the end of the war in the West, the great answer to all of this, and it also comes back to what you were saying about pride. I prefer to use the term gratitude, and to say that really the appropriate answer to much of the immiseration and much more is to turn it round, and instead of resentment, feel gratitude. And it's not impossible, because millions and millions of people across the world have waged that war within themselves and won. And
are you doing that?
Exactly.
Are you doing that? Probably not.
And there's a reason why people are demoralized about that, because there must be some reason that we haven't been building things like the great basilica at Saint Denis in recent years. And there's a reason that those places increasingly look like lost tombstones in a ragged urban, dystopia. And yes, and that's why all of these things point to the same direction. The way down and the way up. And the way down, we know, and we've all been able to study, and we've all been able to see quite enough of. The way upwards, there's a task.
I hope that I can come and see you at one of those events.
I'd love that.
And you said, where do people look?
So if they go to Live Nation, to the website of Live Nation, and type in my name, and we start on September the 8th at Fort Lauderdale, although that's sold out, and we go through Miami Beach, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, New York, and then Denver on October the 13th. So it's a little over a month. Yeah.
When are you in L.A.?
I am in L.A. on the September the 23rd at the Wilton in L.A.
Maybe we'll come out to LA and see you. That would be fun.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. Well, for everybody watching and listening, Mr. Murray, it's always a pleasure, a perverse pleasure in talking to you. Well, good luck with your tour.
Thank you.
You said Fort Lauderdale's already sold out. What size venues are you addressing?
Pretty big ones. I think we're now filling the Fillmore in Miami Beach for the 10th of September. So, yeah, they're nice sized theaters, but still tickets for some. Right. So come along.
Well, so that's heartening. The fact it's pretty strange. If you think about it, that you can make a live event out of what you're doing, showing people this horror and atrocity, and making an intellectual case, and that there is enough public appetite for that to make it not only an event, but a mass event. That's in some ways unprecedented, because you're doing what, live journalism? That's not something that we've seen before. It might also have to do with the fact that as the online world becomes more and more pathological and more difficult to trust, the value of these in-person events is going to increase proportionately.
Absolutely. Among other things, it's a community of people finding each other as well, finding other people concerned about the same things.
Yes. And you're actually there to watch. You can evaluate deeply. And so that's an interesting, unexpected consequence of the virtualization of the world, right? Okay, and then I guess what I'll close with, apart from an invitation to everyone once again to join us on the Daily Wireside, is we'd love to have you lecture for Peterson Academy on poetry.
I'd love that. Yeah, we discussed this. I'm definitely keen to do that.
Yeah. Well, we could make a great course out of that, and that's our goal. So,
thank you, Jordan.